For attending this session titled The Financial Toolkit for SMEs. The panelists are Mr. Hussain Ismail, Deputy Director of the IBF, Professor Sudhakar Raju, Mrs. Anuradha Shaw, and myself as the moderator, Dr. Sudhakar from the Banking Center. Very briefly about how we go about this session, we'll have brief presentations, 15 minutes each, by Professor Sudhakar and Mrs. Anuradha, followed by comments by Mr. Hussain Ismail. And then we'll throw up the floor for all of you to discuss with the speakers. A brief description about Professor Raju. We are very delighted to have Professor Sudhakar Raju here with us in Bahrain today. He is the Middle Chair in Finance at the Healdsburg School of Management with a joint appointment with the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Professor Raju is a PhD in Finance and Master's degree in Public Policy from Harvard. He has received many awards in teaching excellence and is a regular visitor in the IBF on sabbatical as well as on an annual basis to teach various central bank programs. The presentation by Professor Raju is going to be talking about how in a globalized environment, the international integrated global nature of markets cannot have any SME insulated from the world phenomena going on around us. I welcome Professor Raju to come to the podium.
Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Alright, what I thought I would do today is spend a little bit of time talking about something that's very topical, that has been in the news a lot. I thought I would speak a little bit about the ongoing financial crisis in Europe, especially what's been going on in Greece, which has been on the verge of bankruptcy now for the last 6 months. I want to begin by pointing out that the financial crisis is not something that small and medium enterprises can afford to ignore, because 99% of businesses worldwide are small and medium enterprises. In fact, by one estimate, nearly 50% of world GDP is generated by small and medium enterprises. So the financial crisis has had a devastating impact, not only on large corporate businesses, but even so on small and medium enterprises. So it's important to have some basic understanding of the nature of this financial crisis and how this financial crisis differs from what happened in 2007. The first thing to recognize about what's going on in Europe right now is that it's organically very different from what happened in 2007. In 2007, in essence, what happened was derivatives caused the crisis. But currently what's going on in Europe now is the consequence of fiscal policy and the consequence of monetary policy, and has very naturally arisen from the fact that at a time of recession, revenues have fallen and government spending has gone up. If you take a look at the setup of businesses internationally, as I pointed out, SMEs account for 99% of all firms and generate between 40 to 50% of world GDP. Even more than large businesses, the financial crisis has had an extremely adverse impact on SMEs. It's therefore useful to develop some understanding of the ongoing debt crisis. And as I pointed out, while derivatives were at the heart of the crisis of 2007-09, the current debt crisis has nothing to do with derivatives. The way that one thinks of a deficit is really the difference between revenues and expenses. A very simple way of thinking about the ongoing financial crisis in Europe is to think of it in this very simple fashion. In essence, what has happened is that because governments have had to indulge in Keynesian deficit spending, expenses have gone up. But at the same time, because the financial crisis has led to a drop in revenues, tax revenues have dropped. So on both sides of the equation, governments are being hammered, revenues are dropping, expenses are going up, and the inevitable consequences of revenues dropping and expenses going up is an increase in the deficit. The imbalance between revenues and spending is at the root of the current debt crisis in Europe. Now, one of the interesting things about the financial crisis is what it reveals about national character. The tsunami of cheap credit that rolled across the planet created opportunities for societies to reveal aspects of their character that they normally could not afford to indulge. And here's a wonderful book by someone called Michael Lewis. Michael Lewis wrote a classic called Liar's Poker. And this is an extract from an article that he wrote in the New Yorker, which is actually a very insightful article about what the credit crisis reveals about national character. Americans wanted to own homes far larger than they could afford and to allow the strong to exploit the weak. Icelanders wanted to stop fishing and become investment bankers, and that's a reference to something called the Geyser crisis. The Germans wanted to be even more German. The Irish wanted to stop being Irish. Each responded to it in its own peculiar way. No response was as peculiar as the Greeks, however, and the Greek case highlights, I think, the apotheosis of what happened during the crisis. So I want to focus the next few slides on what's been going on in Greece. Greece has a long history, and much of what we know about science and mathematics is the gift of Greece. Ancient Greece gave rise to Western philosophy, science, and mathematics. However, the Greek public school system is one of the worst in Europe. By one estimate, the Greek public school system employs nearly 4 times the number of teachers as does the best system in Europe, which is the Finnish system. The Greeks that gave medicine the Hippocratic Oath had an estimated 2/3 of doctors who never pay taxes. In fact, the story is that one of the first things that Greek governments do when they come to power is that they pull all the tax collectors off the streets. A tax collector pointed out that if the law was enforced, every doctor in Greece would be in jail. The latest estimates place the national debt burden of Greece at about $250,000 for every working Greece. There is essentially no chance that Greece is going to be coming out of bankruptcy. And I was always taken aback by any discussions about the possibility that Greece would ever emerge from bankruptcy. The IMF points out that it wasn't even what we would call an emerging economy. It was a third world country. Here's a very simple calculation that I did. And I did this calculation nearly 2 years ago. And that pretty much convinced me that there was no way that Greece was going to escape bankruptcy. And sometimes, simple calculations like this can often tell you quite a bit about what's going on in a country. The first number there is the GDP number, and the second number is historical growth rate for Greece from 2001 to 2007. The actual growth rate in Greece is actually negative right now, so that's a very optimistic number up there. But even going with this optimistic estimate, if you assume that every cent of GDP was available to finance debt, the amount of money that was available to finance debt is about $40 billion. Now, the public debt of Greece is about $406 billion, and assuming an interest rate of 7%, the actual interest rate is closer to 30% right now. The debt cost is $28 billion. Now, abstracting from the numbers up there, the basic message is that the amount of interest that Greece would have to pay on its loans is $28 billion. Even if it devoted every cent of GDP to pay interest on its debt, it would only cost $40 billion. There is essentially no way that Greece is going to escape bankruptcy. One of the most extraordinary aspects of the Greek case is the fact that Greek banks, unlike US banks, were almost blameless for the financial crisis enveloping Greece. Greek banks did not trade derivatives on a large scale or invest heavily in subprime bonds. The biggest problem faced by Greek banks was that they lent 30 million euros to the Greek government with no certainty of the money ever being returned. In Greece, the banks didn't sink the country sank the banks. Okay, any questions up to this point? Questions? Sure.
I'm just curious. I kept hearing that these people what will happen if actually goes back to what happened?
The market has already discounted the fact that Greek is going to go bankrupt. So the act of Greece going to go bankrupt is not substantially going to affect things. The market has already taken into account the fact that Greece is in a sense bankrupt. So I don't think it's going to change things a whole lot if Greece declares the underlying reality, which is that it is bankrupt. What will happen is that the banks that lent money to Greece, the Italian banks, the Spanish banks, the British banks, would just basically have to write off the loans that they gave Greece, and they would have to openly acknowledge the underlying reality, which is that the loans have actually gone back. It is right. Pretty much. Yeah.
What is the relation between Australia, Greece, and the Euro? This bankruptcy.
I think that the possibility of Greece leaving the euro is a very real possibility. Now you must remember that some of the strictures with regard to being in the euro, Greece was violating that quite massively. For instance, one of the requirements for being a part of the euro was that the deficit has to be, the deficit to GDP ratio for a country has to be about 5%. But in Greece, the deficit to GDP ratio was closer to about 115%. So they were flouting all these regulations quite brazenly. Going back to what you were pointing out about the relationship between Greece leaving the euro and the debt crisis, is that the debt crisis, of course, has led to is going to lead to Greece leaving the euro. It's something that's going to happen almost inevitably. I think that the likelihood of Spain and Italy following is much more unlikely, because Spain and Italy are substantially bigger economies as compared to Greece. As far as Italy is concerned, one staggering figure for Italy is the fact that Italy has more sovereign bonds outstanding in the market than any country other than England and Japan. So most sovereign bonds in the world are emanating from the Italian government than any other governments in the world. So the likelihood of Italy leaving the euro or Spain leaving the euro, which is substantially larger economies, is much more unlikely. Sorry? Right,
Would the new president in France influence the whole thing of Europe subsidizing countries like Greece, Spain, and others? Would the new president come in more influence if he joined forces with Germany to stop financing the new countries?
Sorry to interrupt you, we'll have to take the questions towards the end. We have another presentation and then we'll leave the floor open for questions. Unfortunately, we'll have to wait a few minutes. Let me introduce Mrs. Anuradha Shaw here for the next presentation. A very brief presentation on actually the micro aspects of the financial toolkit, which is the title of this panel discussion. So Dr. has been talking about the broad macro financial aspects, and I'm sure it's very interesting, but there's also another aspect that Mrs. Shaw is going to turn around and talk about, which is primarily what is it that the SME entrepreneur needs to learn in terms of doing the business from the financial side. Anuradha holds a master's degree in economics along with a diploma in anti-money laundering USA, International Compliance Association UK, as well as a diploma in radio and television news broadcasting. She has about 30 years of work experience in international business environments in the segments of credit, franchise management, small business management, owner and manager, as well as many other opportunities that she took hold of in Canada. She's worked as a bank manager, she's worked as an educator, and as a franchising and large business manager in India, Germany, Saudi Arabia, and Canada. In today's presentation, Anuradha will talk about the financial toolkit, which emphasizes the critical need of financial discipline, financial report keeping, importance of business tie-ups, marketing strategies, and ancillary industry tie-ups for SMEs. Anuradha, I welcome you.
Thank you, Subhadra. It's a privilege for me to be here today and to address this to the young people who are hoping envisioning themselves as future entrepreneurs. And it is truly a great privilege for me as an educator, and the authority I bring to my presentation today is also that I have worked as a small businesswoman in Canada, and I know exactly what you will be going through or what you envision, the dreams that you have, the failures that you will face, and the courage that you need to proceed and be successful in your businesses. I like to walk around when I present because I find that too constricting, so don't mind me if I'm just roaming around while presenting. So this presentation is going to be about the most important thing that you need to take care of if you're a business person is to watch your cash. You know, keep an eye on your cash because that's going to be the beginning and end of your success. And how to do that is basically having great financial discipline within the working capital, the current cycle of your business. From the moment that you use cash, either from a bank loan or from your own equity, you bring the cash into the business and you invest it in raw materials. These are current assets, as they are called. Buy raw materials, convert them into finished goods, put them up for sale, either on a cash basis or on a credit basis, receivables basis. Keep your eyes on that, and that is the financial discipline that we'll be talking about over here. And secondly, I also will be talking about maintaining great financial records, because that is the smart way that you will have, the smartest way you will have of getting institutional support. Banks, Toolkit, the government of Bahrain, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, they will take you seriously only if you have good financial records to show your successes as well as failures, and why you need the support that you are asking for. So they will take you seriously if you have that this thing. And finally, we'll be talking about finding access to financing and institutional guarantees the smart way. There are many things we'll be going through at this, from this. This is what I was mentioning, that you start with cash, and whether you bring it out of your own resources, or you take a bank loan or a Toolkit funding or whatever, you start with cash and then you convert it into raw materials. You buy the raw materials that you need in your production cycle, and then you convert it into finally finished goods, go through a process of semi-finished goods and finished goods, and you sell it for cash or for receivables. As a banker as well as a small businesswoman, it has been my experience for close to 35 years that businesses are very, very good at this part, turning cash into raw materials, because this is the business. They know what to do and what raw materials to buy and how to buy it the best possible way, the cheapest way, the cheapest source that you can get your raw materials. This is your skill. You can convert that into finished goods and put it up for sale. But then comes the biggest part. When you do sell it for credit on credit, what happens is it is no longer, most small businesses think, it is no longer the business aspect. They let the receivables go. They become weak. For instance, if I am a pastry maker and I sell to Gulf Hotel, Gulf Hotel will say, give me 3 months credit, I'll buy 10,000 pieces of the pastries from you. But when the time comes, when the 3 months are over, I'm a small businesswoman. It is very difficult for me to go to the Gulf Hotel accountant and say, give me my money today. So that is where the weakness comes. Small businesses do not have the strength to insist upon paying. And if they cannot insist upon paying, their payment is going to get delayed and the next cycle of production is going to suffer for them. And this is where the biggest weakness, financial weaknesses of small businesses are encountered by bankers, the small businesses themselves, of course, and any other financing agency. So it is, I have found it my responsibility as a banker when I was a banker to keep track of my small businesses' receivables and help them resolve the delays in the receivables and put that discipline into them. Go and get the money. Go and approach the guys who are not paying you. Get the money because you can't start the next cycle of production unless we have the cash. Okay, our will be paying huge interest penalties from the banks if you delay the payments. So the next thing that I would like to, so this is basically what it is, cash converted into raw materials and then comes back to cash. And each business has a specific cycle, a 1 month cycle or a 2 month cycle. You have to discipline yourself to return that to cash within that time. So if you look at all businesses, the patterns, they have unique patterns. If I'm a business making abayas, I would have perhaps a 1 month pattern when my cash has to come back to me. If I'm a small parts business, I do the windshield wipers for cars, then I might have a 2 month pattern when I have to convert my cash back into cash and receive it. So this has to be controlled and disciplined and maintained within those time limits of 1 month or 2 months, whatever the requirements of the business is. Okay? And next is, let's go on to the next one. The key role of the entrepreneur is to watch the cash outlays in the business. This is, keep your eyes on the cash. I always say, someone like David Beckham, the champion football player, he doesn't look at his wife, Victoria Beckham, waving from the stands or anything. All he does as a striker, if you watch his game throughout, you will see him looking at the football. That's it. His eyes never stray from the football. If you want to be an entrepreneur, a champion entrepreneur, the football for you is the cash. Keep your eyes on the cash. Whatever changes have taken place in the cash, whether it's in the form of the raw materials or in the form of other assets, keep it there. Keep your eyes. What is happening to your cash? So maintain clean records of purchases and sales. If you want to keep your eyes on the cash, make a very good record of the purchases and sales that you are making. And the main purpose of this is to help you manage and control the cash conversion cycle, the previous slide that I was talking about. And maintain clean records of expenses and earnings. This will help you seek bank financing. The banks will take you seriously. Company will take you seriously if you have a clean record of what are your earnings and what are your expenses, because that's what they want to see, as well as how you are controlling and managing your cash in the cycle. And finally, be aware of your assets and liabilities in cash terms, in terms of dollars and cents or BTs, etc. So this will help you to understand the value of cash in your business and understand how much your business is worth at any point of time. So this will help you have a good balance sheet understanding of your business. So these are the small 3 things that you need to know, that you need to do in order to ensure that you know what is happening to the cash that you're investing in your business. And it is not very complicated. It's quite simple. What is important is the discipline you bring into your business to keep your your eye on what is important in your activity, and that is cash. And go to the next one. I wanted to talk to you about what you bring as your gift to your nation as a small entrepreneur. The gift that you bring is that you support your economy. A lot of GDP comes out of small business enterprises that exist within an economy. You support the economy, you support the society, you give employment opportunities to people, yourself as well as the people you employ, and you bring a cross-border trade development. Anything that you build, you create, you develop, can have a market abroad. Market these days is not regional, it is not national, it can go global at any point of time. And you bring that opportunity for your nation, for your country. And finally, because you're small businesses, you are environmentally a blessing. You don't use a lot of machinery, you don't use a lot of capital investment. Your investment is your own hands and legs and your mind. And a lot of it is handmade, hand-produced, you use labor instead of capital. So it is an environmentally enriching proposition for the nation when small businesses are allowed to flourish. And because of this, commercial banks, BDB, company, international agencies and groups, and the government of the Kingdom of Bahrain are really committed to what you bring for the nation, the kind of service that you do, whether you do it knowingly or you do it unknowingly, it is there. They have to recognize it, they will recognize it, they have to. And finally, one more thing. Excuse me, Subhadra, just give me one moment. Policy makers have a lot of responsibility in this. Policy makers have to encourage this. Policy makers have to train the young entrepreneurs into the direction that they will be helping their nation in. Policy makers have to help the young people who are engaged in giving their effort and their minds and their hands and legs in the service of the nation should get opportunities to market, to enlarge, to seek access to enlarged market. This individuals cannot do themselves. It is the job of the policymakers to attend to that aspect of your success. With that, I'll close it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anuradha. That was an excellent presentation, taking over from Sudhakar's macro-financial environment into the very micro aspects of financing, along with telling us how important financial management is and how we're linked to policy making, to development of economies to grow. That was very nice. Thank you so much. Last but not the least, I would like to introduce Mr. Hussain Ismail, Deputy Director of the IBF, who is going to touch upon the human resources development aspects of SME. This is one of the most critical ingredients in fostering efficient business development, management, through structuring of business, marketing, financing, and eventually, definitely for avoiding business failures.
Thank you, Samantha. I think we have heard all the technical side of entrepreneurship and how to run a company, but when we are, I'd like to ask you a question: what's the most important asset of the company? But I think I urge you always to look at the most important asset of the company, which you're not going to see in the balance sheet. So I think human resources development is really going to lead you to success. You will come with an idea, you will go for making it happen, but please look at the human capital
not something that's extraordinary in any sense of the word. For instance, countries like Spain, countries like Venezuela, countries like Germany have actually been bankrupt. Germany, which is the strongest country in the Eurozone, was bankrupt in both 1932 and 1939. So we just forget history. The current financial crisis is just different in terms of its scope and in terms of its depth, but it is not extraordinary in any sense of the word. So my answer to you about the predictability of financial crises is that we just forget history. If one reaches back and looks at history, financial crises, especially in the 80s, have been happening all the time. Now, the second part of your question has to do with the fragility of what you think would happen in the Middle East in terms of us turning into another Eurozone. I think there are some fundamental differences about what has been happening in Europe and what has been happening in the situation in the Middle East. The issue, I think, in Europe fundamentally is that these are to some extent aging countries. If you look towards the future, it is actually fairly unlikely that countries like Spain, countries like Italy and so on are ever going to grow at any rapid rate anymore, simply because of the fact that the birth rate in these countries is essentially stagnant, which means that these countries have an aging population. The pension liabilities in these countries has been going up quite a bit. The Middle East and most of the Arab world is fundamentally different in terms of the fact that we have what is called a demographic dividend. That is, we have a fairly, the average age of the population in the Middle East is actually quite young. And that is a huge advantage. Unfortunately, it can also be a huge disadvantage. So I think there are some fundamental differences, but the most differences, the key down here is to make sure that one exploits one's comparative advantage.
Thank you, Sudhakar. And with that, we'll have to come to a close with this panel session. Thanks to the speakers and to the wonderful audience here. Before we break out, I would like to make an announcement on behalf of the IPF, as Mr. Simmonsman wanted. We have an evening with Professor Sudhakar on the 6th of June in the IPF at 6 o'clock, and it has been organized with the MENA Center for Investment. Hannah is right there at the back. We'll be hosting a seminar with Professor Sudhakar, who's going to talk about the debt crisis at the length for about an hour, and there'll be a discussion session after that. We welcome you to join us. If you need more details about the IPF and us, we are happy to let you know. Thank you very much again.